Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst. And today we're going to be talking about three really bad ideas, economic ideas that are being bandied about in our culture right now in the United States and other Western world nations. Three really dumb ideas that I keep hearing in conversations. I keep seeing it popping up. We've experienced some of these ideas over the last decade or so, and they just keep coming up, being recycled, and they're just as bad as they ever were, only that people hear more about them, and you hear even some top officials, some leading businessmen, cultural figures, you see them, these bad ideas being recirculated, and there's no reason for it other than people are just repeating what they're hearing. And they're saying, hey, we need to do this because I heard, such and such say it. So the first, let's jump into it and let's see what you think. The first really dumb, bad idea that I keep hearing, and we've seen happen, is the idea of the government giving away free money. We saw this happen, I think, for myself for the first time during the great 2008 recession, where you had George W. Bush actually giving stimulus checks to the population. And so these are checks sent out to people, and they deposit them in their bank, and they can spend the money whatever way they want. So when I first saw this, I was shocked. I was stunned. I was like, wait a minute, the government's giving away free money? Now, the government has been doing something like giving away free money for a while, and the way they've done it is in the form of a sort of a bonus on your taxes called the Earned Income Tax Credit. So if you have a low enough income, say you've been out of work for a while, or say you were laid off partially during the year or whatever, and you qualified and you met, it was a means test, you qualified, you received money in the form of an earned income tax credit. So that's essentially the same thing as giving out free money, only it's given at the time on your taxes, so you don't owe as much on your taxes. So if you worked part-time during a certain segment of the year and you qualified for the Earned Income Tax Credit, instead of paying taxes, say you owed $2,000 that year, you were given a credit of, say, $500 on your Earned Income Tax Credit. So that's $500 that you have saved, and that's basically essentially, because money is fungible, it's essentially giving you $500. So that's been going on for a while. That's been going on for quite a while, actually. I think it's decades now. And that is a form of giving away free money. But the first time I ever ran into the actual government stimulus checks is during the Great Recession of 2008. And that's when I think it's every adult below a certain income level received a stimulus check. And the government felt, well, if we can get people spending more and not cutting back on their spending, because during a Great Recession, people cut back, they stop spending, and then the economy goes into a stall because people are not spending as much, and then businesses close down, and workers are laid off, and there's a domino effect. But so the government said, well, if we can get cash into the hands of the consumers, they will go out and spend money on TVs and cars and so on and so forth. And so that's what they did then. Well, there was at the same time, there was also what they called a Cash for Clunkers program. And that was you could sell your used car. Some of these used cars were quite good. actually. I remember my brother-in-law looked up his F-150, Ford F-150, and they were going to give him quite a bit of money, but he said, no, I don't want to get rid of that car because it's still in good condition. Even though it's an older car, it's still in good condition. He maintained it and kept it up. And so he says, no, I'm not going to sell to the Cash for Clunkers program because the car means more to me than they will give me. So there were all these programs and different things like that. But the actual stimulus check, I don't know if you remember back in 2008, but I think, yeah, you actually got a physical check in the mail. I don't think it was at the point where they just automatically deposit it in your bank. I don't think that took place. I think they were actual physical checks written out to the individual taxpayer. And you got cash, essentially. The government was giving out free money. This is a bad idea. Now, I can understand the logic of it. I can understand, hey, we got to get the economy stimulated during a downturn and so on and so forth. But the idea of money being given out by the government, the news, the news flash is that the government doesn't actually have this money sitting around to give away. What happens is the government actually has to borrow money from the Treasury. They have to borrow money, and then that goes on the government debt. So if you look at government debt in the year 2008, part of the rising of the government debt in the years following 2008 was the fact that the government bailed out a lot of companies. There were some banks that were actually given millions and billions of dollars to stay afloat. So, and there were companies, car companies, if you recall, that actually took government money, and the consumers were given these stimulus checks. And this is a terrible idea. Now, we've done this again with COVID. And the thing here is that with COVID, I don't believe there was even a means test. It was just every taxpayer receives a stimulus check. And so under Trump administration during 2020, that was the actual big year of COVID, everyone, if you recall, got a stimulus check, got free money from the government. And then the next year, if you recall, Joe Biden in 2021 gave out a stimulus check. So we got at least 2 stimulus checks, and I'm not quite sure, there might have been a third one, but I can't remember exactly how many there were. And these ones involved a lot more money than the 2008. And again, all of these stimulus checks, they were not these checks that were written out with money that the government already had. These were borrowed dollars that the government gave out. They gave out money that they had to borrow. So they didn't even have the money, and they gave it away to consumers, and we spent it. And supposedly that helped people survive. I'm not sure how $500 is going to really make or break a family. It might have in a few cases, but all of these billions and trillions of dollars given away just like that, and it added to our debt, which is now at least 38, 39 trillion, approaching $40 trillion debt, where the interest payments on the national debt alone are $1 trillion now every year. And it's just a matter of time. How long can we continue to service this $40 trillion debt with interest payments amounting to over $1 trillion a year? It just makes no sense. You know, the Bible talks about, no man a debt except for the debt of love. You know, we owe every person the obligation to love them, love our neighbor as ourselves, do unto others as we would do unto them. and as we would have them do unto us. And so we're told to avoid debt as much as possible in the Bible. And yet our government is spending money hand over fist and just basically burdening us with an unsurmountable debt. And at some point in the future, some generation is going to have to deal with the either total collapse or somehow they're going to have to deal with the debt that is building up every year. So that's the first really bad, really dumb idea that I've seen bandied about. And it's still continuing. It's still continuing. That's the absurdity of it. We know that the debt is growing, but we just keep doing it. And politicians don't seem to want to get to the root core of this issue, which is basically entitlement programs. Okay, the second really dumb idea that I hear talked about, now this hasn't actually been implemented, so it's not like the government giving out free money. We know that's actually happened a number of different times, at least 3 times, I think maybe even a 4th time. This one is called UBI, Universal Basic Income. And you hear this from people like Elon Musk. You hear this from certain politicians. You hear this by economists. You hear this with the AI, emergence of AI and the building of data centers and the warnings from the tech industry saying that AI is going to displace American workers. They're going to take away millions and millions of jobs. And the only recourse that the government has is UBI, Universal Basic Income. Now, Andrew Yang is the one man that's associated with Universal Basic Income because he wrote a book and it had a whole entire chapter on UBI. I have read that book. I think I've done a couple of videos on analyzing his chapter on UBI. It doesn't make sense. The big question is, how do you pay for UBI? Here we have a government, the United States, currently at or around $40 trillion government debt. The interest payments alone are now exceeding $1 trillion a year. So how can a nation that's that far in debt actually start even conceiving of or talking about or even thinking about giving out at least $1,000 a month to every taxpayer? This is the proposal. This was the proposal about, I think it was a decade ago, by Andrew Yang, is that everyone will get at least $1,000 a month to live on, and then they can build on that. Well, yeah, sure. I mean, that would be great from a financial standpoint if the government would give you $1,000, and then you could take your job and add to that, or you could stay home and fix your home or improve your property. There are all kinds of things you could do with $1,000 a month. That would be $12,000 a year. $12,000 a year given to you by the government. Again, the big problem is how are the politicians going to pay for this? How are these tech industrial giants who are suggesting this, like Elon Musk, how are we going to pay for it? Now, they say with the coming of AI, we'll be able to utilize these robotic AI agents. For example, in the car companies, they will be on the assembly lines instead of workers, so the productivity will go way up. They can run 24/7. You don't have to pay them. So we're going to be producing cars and all kinds of items, consumer gadgets and electronics and all kinds of items without labor costs. So the price can go way down. There will be an abundance of these items. And so you won't need as much to live on. And eventually, according to Elon Musk, that all of the basics of life, food and shelter and housing and everything, will essentially be so low cost or free that because of AI's rise in productivity, that we can get these robots to do all of our work. And this will justify the AI, because the government will then be reaping a windfall because of the corporate taxes, because the companies will be so prosperous with AI. They'll be saving so much money because they're not hiring workers and paying insurance for workers and paying retirement for workers. Now, that'll be a problem, though, with retirement, because if you don't have workers and you're not taxing these robots because they're not getting paid, then how are you going to get Social Security money flowing in to that administration, and how are you going to fund Social Security? All kinds of problems are developed when you think in terms of robots taking over all of the work positions. But people like Elon Musk are saying that we're going to have to pay people, at least for some period of time, when all of these AI displacements happen. And he's saying like 3 to 5 years from now, AI will have taken so many different jobs that you'll have so much unemployment that you're going to have to give people a minimum basic income just to survive, to pay for food, to pay for housing, and pay for the necessities of life. So UBI will be a necessity. Yeah, but again, how are you going to pay for it? You don't have the money. So you're going to have to confiscate all kinds of property and goods, or you're going to have to do some kind of financial magic and wizardry to come up with all the money, because you're talking a country that's $40 trillion in debt, and now you're going to pay every tax-paying citizen $1,000 a month, even $1,000, which is not really a livable wage for most people, most adults in this country, especially in some of these higher-priced cities. Like if you're out there in California and you're receiving $1,000 a month from the UBI fund from the U.S. government, that's not going to cut it. Now, that can cut it for some single individuals in their early 20s or even in their 30s who don't have a lot of obligations, cost obligations, don't have a wife and don't have children to support. But if you're a family man and you are trying to support a family, $1,000 a month isn't going to cut it. So you're going to have to supplement that with some kind of other work. So you're going to have to be retrained anyway into some job if AI takes your job. And the idea of giving people free money, again, is absurd. The stimulus check idea was absurd because you're giving people free money. But the UBI is even worse because you don't have to even work and you're going to get money. The Bible teaches that if a man does not work, he should not eat. If a man does not work, he will not eat. The principle there is work is necessary to feed yourself, to support yourself, for living expenses. If you're married, you have to support your wife if you're a man, and you need to work. You can't just sit back because everything collapses. If you're a man with a wife and children, you're trying to raise a family, you can't just sit back on your couch and play video games and expect someone to pay for your living expenses. Somebody's going to have to go out to work, and that has been, the Bible teaches, that's the man's role, ultimate role. And so the government, even if it worked in theory, that the government could give you an affordable wage, which would be probably minimum $25,000 to $50,000 a year. In some places, even $75,000 you would need to raise a family, housing, food, everything. The government could not do that, and it's good that it could not do that because it would violate the principle if a man does not work, he should not eat. So we need to be aware of incentives and not violate human nature, because if we do, or if we even try to do it, let alone the government will collapse with its debt, it would destroy the whole work ethic, which communist USSR almost did during the reign of Soviet communism, when the workers said, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. So this loss of incentive and motivation and drive on the part of the Soviet USSR workers, communist workers, was evident all around. And there was just not that drive to work because you weren't rewarded for your hard work. You got the same pay as somebody who didn't work very hard because of the government structure. So that's the second terrible, worst idea. You have, free government money with these stimulus checks, government giving money out. And then you have this really bad idea of universal basic income, which the government is already in deep, deep debt, and it's going to plunge itself even deeper. And then the third bad idea that I hear that has come up lately because of the mayor in New York City, Mamdani, this Democratic Socialist mayor, is he wants to have government-owned grocery stores, and he wants the government to play a bigger role in certain industries. And now, if you're aware of communism and the history of communism, communism is basically a system where the government controls every industry. So it doesn't matter if it's the gasoline industry in the Soviet Union, the government was in control of that. If you look at Cuba today, the government is in charge of all of that. If you go to Mexico, for example, when I visited Mexico decades ago in conjunction with my seminary training, I noted that Pemex, the gas stations all over the place, that's the one brand there was, Pemex, and that was the government-owned gas stations. So all of the gas stations, all of the oil, all of the petrol industry was owned by the government of Mexico. They had made it a government entity. And that's the socialist vision. So you have this sort of creeping socialism. So the government takes over this and takes over this. Now, in New York City, Mamdani is an unabashed socialist. So he wants more and more government control of more and more areas of the economy. And this is the danger. This is the problem with big government, the socialists, and then ultimately communism is the worst, is the only difference between socialism and communism is degrees. Communism is further down the road to totalitarianism. Socialism is a little bit less so, but depending on what form of socialism, it gets pretty close to communism. Communism is an extreme form of socialism. So he wants to nationalize, or he wants to control in New York City this government grocery store, and he wants to fix the prices of items because he says the food is unaffordable today. Well, the way to fix the prices is to work with the private ownership of these stores, or bodegas as they call them in New York City, and do everything you can to help these private owners drive down prices and still make a profit. It isn't to nationalize everything. And that's the socialist communist vision. You want to nationalize everything. So you want the government involved in price fixing. That's what Mamdani wants to do. He wants to be in charge of government housing. He wants to take over more and more housing units. Basically, that is the spread of socialism, where you get the government more and more involved. Well, the problem with that is based on the corruption of human nature. A famous saying by an individual in Britain by the title of Lord Acton was, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the more power you have, the more temptation to corruption. And if you want to get a really corrupt system, all you have to do is give it total power or approaching total power. So if you want to see a more and more corrupt New York City, you just have New York City government control more and more things. Now, people complain, well, private individuals, private corporations are corrupt too, like Microsoft. They've always been trying to monopolize the personal computer industry, and they almost have a near monopoly on the operating systems on computers, except for Apple and Linux and some other operating systems. But Windows, for a long time, has been corruptly trying to muscle out all its competition, and they've been really brutal and ruthless in their way of winning the market share, which they've dominated for so long. Yeah, there are problems with the private industry. There's no question about it. But what are the alternatives? Well, you give the government these industries and they control it. Then you get a lot of corruption. Then you get a lot of incompetence. And it's basically impossible for the government to set prices on products and goods. It's in services. It's basically impossible. And that's the problem with the old Soviet Union. Their economy was near collapse. And the reason for it, the big part, was that they couldn't predict prices and they couldn't set prices accurately because they were trying to do it from a theoretical armchair quarterback way. And instead of letting the free markets set the prices, the supply and demand, and letting the market forces determine the price of an item, they were artificially setting prices. It was either too low or too high, and it messed everything up. So people starved, people went without, and there was real human suffering. So what we've learned since the Industrial Revolution is that markets do better when they're left into the hands of private individuals. So the challenge is to try to keep the economy moving along in a fair way with minimal intervention. And the government does need to intervene at instances, bankruptcies. They need to intervene and have the disorderly disassemble of companies that can't make it. And they need to break up monopolies. And you can't have one big, like Standard Oil, way back in the day, taking over the entire industry. Or you have to break up these monopolies or they will gobble up everyone. And so, yeah, there's a place for government intervention into the free market. But Mamdani and New York Democratic Socialists want to get more government involved in the economy. And they want to take over more and more sectors of the economy. They want to take over more and more parts of a person's life. And it's this creeping totalitarianism. They want a big government because they feel that a government... So that's a terrible, awful idea. It cuts against the human nature that, as described in the Bible. It violates biblical anthropology. It's just a contradiction. So these three bad ideas you're going to see popping up from time to time, and we really need to, as Christians, say no. These are incompatible with God's word, and we need to speak out against them and say no. I hope that's been a helpful analysis, and we will see you back next week. God bless.